this is what every manager is being asked, and their job is to enable every manager to be able to answer these questions, among other things. But if they don't enable them, then the whole thing is going to fall apart, basically. The people that will be on all those teams are the people who will produce better work faster, not just any work.
And before we go on, I'm a better boss than Scott, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Welcome to Supercompanies, my quest to understand how the smartest and most valuable companies in the world will be built in the age of AI. I'm your host, Greg Show, 7-time founder and the CEO of Section AI. This episode, we're speaking with Taylor Malmsheimer, who is currently building a super company with me. She's our co-founder and head of product at Section. Since our pivot to AI 3.5 years ago, Taylor has talked to hundreds of leaders about their AI transformations. And one of the consistent needs that we see is enabling leaders to answer the tough questions about AI that employees either ask or are in their heads. So this episode's all about that. Taylor, welcome to my podcast, or it'll be our podcast and then eventually be your podcast. But welcome to Super Companies. Taylor is building a super company on the inside and is living the reality of our own transformation, because we weren't AI native. Any company formed before 2023 can't claim to be AI native, so we're not at Section. And as co-founder, you've done pretty much every job here at Section, including now as head of product. Tell the audience how you got here and what the last few years, maybe post-pivot, has been like.
So I spent 4 years before Section working for Scott Galloway, who's the founder of Section. Went through some twists and turns, as many companies do, but have been at Section for 7, almost 8 years now, which is crazy. But really, since we pivoted the business to focus on AI, have led the development of our platform, which really came out of when we were trying to use old non-AI methods to help organizations transform their workforce, figure out how to get every employee understanding how to use AI. That just wasn't working to use those old methods.
Those old methods being like webinars, workshops, Zoom calls.
We went through a whole year of basically exploring AI avatars, right? But still in the world of we're making videos. And then we threw all that away and said, what would this look like if we actually built with AI? Which I think has been transformative for both the business and for us just to understand better the capabilities of the platform. That's what I do at Section today.
And before we go on, I'm a better boss than Scott, right?
Some ways not. I don't know. I can publicly on public record, right?
Of course you can.
Or I should, because you are actually my boss right now. So
exactly.
Yeah,
Taylor, there's so much we could talk about. This probably won't be the only time you appear on the podcast, but for this episode of Super Companies, we're going to talk about the top 10 questions that every head of AI needs to be able to answer. So why are we starting there?
I talk to heads of AI every week, and the companies that I talk to who are the most advanced, one of the things that I think has been striking is that heads of AI at those organizations have actually spent time to develop almost like an objection handling document for their managers, and have spent time actually thinking about what are the questions we get asked consistently, what are the questions we think we're going to get asked based on the way that our usage is trending and the things that we're seeing as heads of AI, and then how do I equip managers to answer? As the head of AI, your job is to empower and enable the manager to drive the transformation in their team. That layer is where change often goes to live or die. And this is one of the key playbooks for enabling the manager, which is you have to assume that they're the front line of defense, right? When an employee is asking questions and really grappling with, should I be using AI? How should I be using it? Is this going to hurt my job and my prospects at this company? Those come up in one-on-ones with the manager. So they need to be empowered. And so that's why we built out this list.
And so then these may be questions that aren't necessarily being asked, but they're certainly being thought by the average employee. And to your point, if they are being asked, likely in a one-on-one with a manager, not in front of the VP or CEO at an all hands, right?
There are certain questions that are being asked. I would say more the questions in the resistor bucket and then the experimenter bucket, which we have. Those are questions that I know from talking to heads of AI, they are being asked today and they're being asked of us sometimes. And as you get to the more kind of existential questions, I think those are questions that are sometimes being asked, but are more the questions we see on the horizon as more users get more advanced.
All right. So the plan today is to talk about these questions and the answers, and also, of course, share these resources in the show notes for all of our listeners. Taylor, how have you organized it?
Yeah. So we basically organized the questions into 3 buckets based on the AI maturity of the person that's asking the question. So first bucket is questions that you get from people very early in the journey. Often they're more objections that come from a place of kind of fear or anxiety These are questions that are usually asked by resistors, people, again, as I said, early in the journey. Then as people get more into using AI, I think about them as these are experimenters. They're using AI, they're in the tools every week or every day, but they're not your most advanced users. They're still figuring out their use cases. They're asking more kind of practical questions, challenges around the ins and outs of I'm using these tools. I'm starting to experience some of the benefits. I'm starting to experience some of the downsides as well. And then the third category is really going to be from your more advanced power users. These are more existential questions that come from once you've seen how powerful AI is, you start to grapple with the technology. And again, I think these are questions that are being voiced once in a while, but are being voiced less frequently. But I would expect to be voiced more and that the manager will need to be able to have a conversation around these questions.
Yeah, and I think some of these are questions and some of these would be more like conversations that we have to enable managers to be able to have.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say we have tried to create a framework for how to think about how to answer the questions. In some cases, there are clear answers, like you're saying, that either based on our point of view or based on your company policy. And then in some cases, it's more if an employee is asking, what do I do when AI is doing my job? That's your entry point into a conversation with the employee around that question.
This is about 10 questions that every leader, and I think we think about as AI leader, but I think, Taylor, this should be every leader because every leader is an AI leader.
Yeah, I think about it as every leader. I think about it as the reason the head of AI partly has to know this is because this is what every manager is being asked, and their job is to enable every manager to be able to answer these questions, among other things. But if they don't enable the managers to answer these questions, then the whole thing is going to fall apart, basically.
And you think it's going to fall apart because employees, if they don't get the answers to these questions, won't transform themselves and the way they work?
I said fall apart because I think the whole transformation is driven through the manager, right? No one reports to the head of AI. The head of AI's mandate is basically to empower the manager and enable the manager to get their team, whether it's 4 marketing people or 500 salespeople, right? Like depending on the level of the manager, to get their team using AI and building in the most effective way possible. So I think of this as one of the playbooks managers need. I think that the questions, they're the symptom of the problem, depending on which questions we're talking about. And we can talk more about how we have bucketed them. There's a set of questions that if they're being asked, indicate resistance to using AI. There's a set of questions if they're being asked, indicate that I am using AI, but I'm actually running into some of the challenges. So I think they need to be answered because they usually indicate an underlying challenge that the manager needs to address, if that makes sense.
So just to be clear, these are questions that employees are either asking or thinking and not asking. Like these are like thought bubble questions or unexpressed questions.
We came up with this list of questions by talking to heads of AI. So I talk to heads of AI every week and get an understanding from them of what are the challenges that they're facing. One of the challenges that they're facing is enabling their managers and really enabling the whole population to get more comfortable with these tools so then they're using them in more advanced ways. I think we decided to bucket these questions in 3 buckets. The buckets are on the continuum of how advanced your workforce is. The first bucket is that you get from people who are very early or resistant to AI. There's a second set of questions from people who are, I would say, experimenting with AI, but not yet experts. And then there's a set of questions you get from people who are very advanced with AI. I think that the resistor questions are being explicitly asked. When I talk to heads of AI, they're getting asked questions like, AI is terrible for the environment. Why should I use it? Or aren't I just training my replacement? Those are examples of resistor questions. Those we hear are getting asked. The experimenter questions, I think, are getting asked, that second bucket. Those are more practical. Okay, I'm in, but now am I using it safely? Am I going to get in trouble for using it this way? I don't think that the most advanced questions are being asked. I don't think they're being expressed yet. So those are questions like, what am I going to do when AI is doing 60% of my job? What's our company's competitive advantage now? I think those are more questions that, frankly, there's just not as many people there yet. But once you use AI in a really powerful way, you start to grapple with those questions. My bet is those questions start to get asked more.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was actually asked by a job candidate today, what will your moats be in 2 or 3 years if AI makes it so easy to build everything, specifically software? And of course, we build software. What's our competitive advantage?
Those questions about the company probably get asked more now because they sound smart. The questions I don't hear getting asked as much are the questions of what do I do when AI is going to do all this work for me, which I think probably comes more from a place of fear. I don't want to know the answer to that question a little bit, right?
Let's go to those resistor questions. And do you think they're genuine or is there a reason to resist? What's your sense of how employees are asking those kind of questions? And do we still see as many of them, let's say this year, than we did last year? What's your sense of that?
I think if you're in that Silicon Valley startup world, those questions are being asked less now than they used to be. But I think in the rest of the world, they're not. Like what I hear from heads of AI, what I hear from my friends, I'm shocked that the three, I would say, most advanced heads of AI I have spoken with, they all had developed points of view on specifically the environmental question because they have been asked it so much that they actually went and developed an asset on that question. Now, maybe that's evolved a bit, but I don't know. I think the change happens slower in the legacy organizations.
Yeah, and or you live in a place where your utility bill's going up.
To your point, I think sometimes the question is asked authentically. I think sometimes the question is asked because people are looking for something. But the underlying issue is the same, which is coming from a place of fear, right? I don't want to use this. I'm concerned about my jobs.
And is it your sense the head of AI needs to have this question answered based on their own personal point of view? Are they building talking points for the company or are they building something that's authentic to themselves?
The company does have to have a point of view, right? Like some of these questions, like, will AI champions get paid more? They shouldn't just like riff on that. Like they should know what the company's point of view is. And that should be conveyed to the manager. And the manager should have some talking points. The heads of AI I speak with that are most successful they are authentic to the company, right? Like the environment question. If you don't have an environmental strategy, then don't pretend you have an environmental strategy. So I think that's like the first part. I'd be curious what you would expect as the CEO, right? Would you expect Michael, our head of AI, to have specific answers to every question? Maybe, but probably not. You'd want him to have empowered me and every other manager to understand Section's overarching point of view, to be able to handle these questions and the set of questions that are going to come in 2 months when things change.
I would expect our head of AI, you're right, Michael Dominic, for those who don't know him, we just hired him. I would expect Michael to have answers to all these questions. I think all of them he should have circulated up, right, to me and the management team to say, we all aligned here. Here's how we're going to answer these questions. I'd also expect him, and I'd expect managers to be allowed to say them in their own voice and words, right? Don't read from a script. That's probably not going to land very effectively.
I think there are different levels. Take a question like, how do I handle the influx of AI slop I'm getting? That's a question where like we have a point of view. We've talked about that at the leadership team. We expect the employee to not be giving us AI slop, and we can articulate that. That's a little more simple. Whereas a question like, what's our competitive advantage with AI? Or is all of this worth it? Like, I think we should have a point of view on that. But I would also say it's not answer the question, move on. Like you're not Google, you know what I mean? It's more like a conversation with the employee, right? If an employee asks me, what do I do when AI is doing my job? I'd be like, that's a really interesting question. Like, what do you think about that? So some of them are more like question and answer to your point, and some are more like philosophical, where you want the employee to engage, I would say.
And or there's no right answer. I think one of the challenges I think for all of us here, especially for managers and leaders, is they're expected to have the answers, right? And they're expected to at least provide answers that seem valid for 6, 12, 18, 24 months, some period of time. And it's hard, obviously. It feels more like a prediction than an answer. And in some ways should be delivered that way. This is what we think today, without overqualifying and caveating every answer, because you can't do that either. And it's just, I think, like bullshit. But I think you do have to also acknowledge that some of this stuff, we're figuring it out together. It's kind of what you're saying. It's a conversation and we have a point of view, but that will likely change. Certainly these technologies are changing at just a crazy rate.
The list that we have, I think we made it like a month ago. Already I'm like, I don't know, we're probably missing one or two that have come up with the advent of, as we all have access to co-work, other more advanced capabilities. To me, it's like, you have to be transparent about when the company does have a point of view or a policy, and then also transparent when you don't know the answer, to your point. Some questions, we have one in here, will I get fired for not using AI? If there's an explicit performance expectation to use AI, like every manager should know that. If there isn't, or they're still figuring that out, I think that's where you can like have more of that back and forth conversation, is what I would say.
But just to get tactical for a moment, the head of AI, it sounds like your expectation of a head of AI or hope for a head of AI is that they are keeping this running list. It is a list that's updated, probably at least quarterly, in terms of the kinds of questions that they might get asked. It's probably going up to the rest of the org towards the C-suite, and then it's going down, right, to line managers? Is it a training? If you thought about a place with hundreds of managers, what do you think the most effective way for the head of AI to handle this?
It's probably both. Like, it's got to be probably an initial, some sort of training, right? Like, this is where you should look for these answers. These are like kind of the principles we want you to keep in mind, those types of things. And then I think it's probably more something where there's an ongoing, either a Slack channel or an ongoing office hours, like how do I handle tougher questions, that kind of thing.
If you thought about it really simply, managers have to handle questions, and those questions will range from, can I show a AI generated prototype to a client, and all the way to, what about my job? And almost everything in between. So we're asking managers to be heads of AI for their own team.
Yeah, essentially. The place these questions are most common is in a one-on-one.
Because you're not going to ask these things at an all hands, right? Should we start with the hardest question first, or should we end with it?
What do you think is the hardest question?
What do you think is the hardest question?
The last one? What do I do in AI?
Yeah, what about my job?
There's two flavors of that question, right? One is the resistor flavor, which is, am I going to get fired if I don't do this? Actually, there's three. The second is another resistor question, which is, aren't I just training AI as my replacement? Those are both from a place of, I don't want to do this. Once you use AI a lot, you start to be like, oh, this is really good. What does that mean for me? So you come back to that question as well. Yeah, we can start with that one.
So what's the answer? Our observation is a lot of leaders don't have good answers to that question. They avoid it. I get asked all the time when I do these keynote presentations to company workforces, don't ever talk about jobs. Take that slide out of the presentation where you talk about more agents than humans. We can't talk about that kind of thing. But at a higher level, what's your advice to heads of AI?
As the head of AI, your job is to know from the C-suite and have alignment on, are you going to basically entertain that question or not? That's the first thing. I would argue, though, that you should entertain the question, because if they're not asking it, they're thinking it.
Sure.
The obvious thing that most people say right now is you won't lose your job to AI, you'll lose your job to someone using AI. I think that is a very lazy answer and just like a not fair answer, because I think the more thoughtful way I would answer someone saying, aren't I just training my replacement, is, yeah, you are training your replacement for some of the stuff that you do today. Because if you frame it like that, then you can open up that conversation with the employee around what are the things you do today that it would be good for you to get off of your plate so you can do other things. The reality is, the more you use AI, the more you realize, yeah, you do different work.
This is the idea that AI does tasks, AI doesn't do jobs, basically, is what you're saying.
So that's how I think about answering that question. Again, more through the lens of, how do you take that question and make it into a productive conversation?
First of all, it doesn't help that the media narrative is that AI is coming for our jobs. It doesn't help that you have incompetent CEO like Jack Dorsey, who overhired for 4 years in a row and then laid off 40% of the company and said it was AI related. We know it wasn't. It doesn't help that Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, is talking about 50% of the white collar workforce being impacted in the next few years. So the context of that question is pretty tough for the average employee, because it's mostly gloom and doom, right? Of course, you have others on the other side of that conversation, like Scott Galloway, saying it's all bullshit and there's not going to be a jobs apocalypse. And I would say the data so far seems to support that there hasn't yet been much job destruction yet from AI. And the reality is, I think most employees know that CEOs want to drive earnings, and the way to drive earnings is to become more efficient, and that's code for deploy AI and lay people off.
And almost every CEO right now is just talking about AI as becoming more efficient, right? Like, they're not talking about it through the lens of it's critical to our mission as a company, which is what we talk about a lot with people. Like, the mission imperative is efficiency. If you're being asked about, aren't I replacing my work, or isn't this taking my job? It's more like, break down that fact that yes, AI is going to replace some of the things you do now. When I think about a big company where you've got hundreds of managers, if you're going to actually give them the tools to engage with this question versus just say, ignore it or say ask at all hands, I think that's the level at which I would do it. I think there's a second level you can have the conversation at. So we were just talking about tasks, like tasks will go away, but will some jobs go away? Like, the honest answer is probably some will. We have a slide that we use that's like your team before AI, right? And it's like a standard bell curve. And then we have the slide that says your team with AI. And it's like, there's no lower performers and there's much more high performers than there are medium. I think that's a slide that like you can use as the CEO. I can use and have that conversation, but it starts to get harder.
I don't disagree, but you're a manager. You're paid to manage and paid to lead. You didn't ask for this, meaning now you're managing and leading in the age of AI. And I would admit it's pretty challenging. Well, employees are so smart. They're going to figure this out. And so as a manager, I think you need to have an answer to the question. If you're a mature company in a mature industry and getting your ass kicked, yes, AI likely is being deployed in order to make the organization more efficient and to expand gross margins and lower costs. And by the way, those costs may not be internal. You can lower costs with AI, meaning you can cut vendors, you can cut agencies, you can cut old SaaS platforms you don't use anymore. Lots of ways to get efficiencies.
That's why I think it's easier for people to reframe it around, we're going to cut some stuff, not all the stuff, because then you can jump to all those things you just said. Whereas if you just engage with the second kind of level, which is some jobs are going to go away, but what's the next step from there? Like, how do you have that conversation?
I think you have to say, you got to use my answer. It's the best answer I've heard. My answer is some teams are going to be smaller in a year and doing the same amount of work. Some teams are going to be the same size and doing more work, and some teams will be even bigger with AI because we want more of them. And the reality is we're not sure exactly how that's going to play out. And you might be one of those teams that the team is smaller. And if that's the case, if you're impacted, meaning you get fired by us, you'll go back into the workforce as being the most AI-enabled worker or contributor as you can be. And I think a good manager or leader has to acknowledge that degree of uncertainty. I'm more confident saying that I don't see any job loss coming from AI. I'm not going to guarantee anything because we are a startup and we're very fast growing. But again, if I was the CEO of an ad agency, I'm not sure I could be so confident.
I think there's two other things related to this question. One is the opportunity is so clear to get across that regardless of whether you're on the team that gets smaller or the team that stays the same or the team that gets bigger, the people that will be on all those teams and remain on all those teams are the people who will produce better work faster. They're not just the people who produce any work faster. They're not just the people who produce better work. That's the bar with AI. And one of the key talking points I would want every manager to have is that, because that answers a lot of these questions. And if I was in a one-on-one, I'd say that's who I want you to be.
Let me just play the employee for a moment. So I'm going to push back and say, hey, boss, are you convinced that all of us can do not all of our work, but some of our work better and faster with AI? What's your answer?
I'm convinced that's the case, as long as I'm in a knowledge work function.
So your point of view is if you haven't been able to make that happen yet yourself, meaning do higher quality work faster, you're probably struggling with AI still, or the company's giving you shitty AI tools.
Yeah, because the important thing is that we basically have a slide I like that says most teams look like this, right? You've got the anti-AI, AI is evil, I don't want to use it. Then you've got like the disengaged people who are like, I've worked this way for 20 years. This seems interesting, but like, I don't want to change right now. Then you've got like the enthusiasts, but they don't really know what they're doing. They're like, this is cool. I want to engage. I just don't know where to start. And then you've got your power users. And then the managers look like that. So if like you've got a manager who's in the disengaged category, but they might have a power user on their team, like that's really hard. I think the manager is the hardest job right now in the context of AI because there's so much pressure from the top, but the employee base looks like we just talked about. They're all over the map. And I think that there's this kind of tough thing happening right now where all of the technology has enabled us to get to the point where it is so fast to create something, to create what we call a section like a V1. Let's say that the time, speed, ease with which to get to V1 has increased like 30x with AI. The time, speed, ease to get to a final version of something, whether it's a product you ship or a client deliverable or a plan you make, has also increased, but it's only increased like 5x. So to get to V1 is like 30x. To get to V final, the final thing is like 5x.
5x improvement.
Yeah. So both have gotten better and easier. And most CEOs think that the 30x is applied to the final version.
That's what I think. What I can't believe this is not happening.
Yeah, this is just actually an intervention podcast with you.
Oh, this is what this is. This is manage the CEO via the podcast.
No, but that's really hard. The CEO is going, why aren't we shipping every feature under the sun with 2 engineers when we used to have 10 in this specific part of the org? And the head of engineering is going, we are doing more, but it's not at that rate that you're hearing and reading, especially because the organizations are so slow to get access to the most capable technology.
What's your point of view about the genuine conscientious objectors? I think there are some out there for a variety of reasons. The AI models were illegally trained on someone else's IP, their impact on the environment, the draw of energy, and so on. Is your advice leave the knowledge economy if you're going to be a conscientious objector?
I am the type of person that always just defaults to thinking about this is the way the world works, and I want to work in the way the world works.
You want to be successful in the
I want
world.
to be successful. And a lot of people aren't like that. And I do think the way AI is developing caters a lot to someone like me. I will just accept that this is the direction the world is going, and I'll figure out how to work in that context. And that would be my advice. I hear you, but it feels like unless you can find a company, and I bet there will be a small portion of companies that make that their thing, right? Like we use AI in a really responsible way. But unless you can find those companies, this is where it's going.
My advice to my 3 kids is if you really are a conscientious objector, then you should leave the knowledge economy. And that may not be how the manager wants to answer the question. I think you want to entertain the concern. All right, let's move to the next category or bucket of questions as you described them, which are people getting more active, but they're not yet advanced.
Yeah, I call them like the experimenters. So that's basically, how do I use AI safely? Which, like I said, is an umbrella question for all the questions that come after. Which tools can I use? And can I upload XYZ information? How do I handle the influx of AI slop I'm getting? You start to get those questions, right, when people are using it more. And then will AI champions get paid more?
And then next?
And then the last bucket is the power users. So these are more of those like kind of existential questions, I guess, once you've grappled with, oh, this is quite powerful technology. The first one, is it worth it? Like it's a lot of time and effort and coordination and cost.
This one I don't get. I'm an advanced user, but I'm not sure it's worth it. I would thought if you're an advanced user, you're getting a lot of value from it, even if there's a lot of coordination costs and agent breaks and stuff like that. Or you're saying they're still skeptical, even though they're more advanced, they're still questioning the business value?
Like last week, I, in the same week, had this experience where I asked Claude to build me a slide, and it literally took 8 minutes to build one slide in a Google slide deck. It was comical, right? I could have made the slide in 20 seconds. And then I also created this like really effective automation for one of the things that I have to do every day, right? So it's like this kind of whiplash. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. And then it's also
right.
Go down the rabbit hole.
Right. The genius and clown phenomena.
I don't know that these questions are being expressed a ton out loud today, but like to me, the more thoughtful question is, okay, now I've gone down this path. I see there's a lot of potential, but I see there's also a lot of effort to get to that potential. Are we really going to all do this in this large company?
That's a good question. Are we really serious about working this way? I think is a question a manager should have to answer, because you're right. Once you get into it, you realize there's a fair amount of effort to work this way and get everybody working this way. And it's a fair question. It could be a fad.
And there's a lot of lost hours, right?
And then these existential questions, probably again, not helped by Anthropic's been public about this, that 100% of their code, 100% is machine generated. Now, they haven't laid off any engineers yet, but maybe they will.
The other thing I think that we didn't really talk about in the context of when people are saying, like, is AI going to take my job? There's also a much more ego-driven thing that I think is important that the manager understands is happening. Andrej Karpathy wrote about this. He literally wrote, it hurts the ego a bit. You see a lot of engineers starting to be a bit more public around, this feels crazy. I have built my whole life on being good at coding, and now I'm not writing any code. And I think people see that and hear that. And I've had this experience where I'm using AI to do something that I've been good at. And I'm like, okay, it is making me better at it, but it's also a little, like, what does that mean? And you can't engage with that authentically if you haven't experienced it. So it all comes back to, again, the manager actually.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that. It also comes back to you as a manager, leader of any type, need to be authentically enabled, which means you've actually thought about it for yourself. If you want to be a super company, then you need super teams. And if you're a manager of a super team, getting challenged in a way by all these questions is probably a good sign. Certainly as the questions get more advanced, it's probably a good sign because that means your team is starting to really, grapple with them. These are good conversations to have. I think they're good to have with your kids, your family, your community. I think we're all trying to figure this out. And I think we almost have an obligation to each other to help each other out here.
And you're going to start having questions that we haven't even really grappled with the answer, right? Like, how can AI be a manager? Is AI going to manage other people? Or am I going to get comped based on the number of agents I manage?
Not just the quantity, but the value of agents. When you have really high value agents operating across the org, at all levels of the org, I think that opens up another whole set of questions, like you just suggested. We don't need to put agents on the org chart yet, but really integrate it into our work lives.
There's a whole set of questions now before you get to these more existential questions around agents. It's almost like this first list is the non-agent layer, and then there's like the resistor, the experimenter, and the existential questions all through the lens of agents as well.
The reality is we are in our own bubble at Section, right? Which is a startup bubble and an AI bubble. But when you think about most organizations who are just still deploying Copilot to chat,
they're not asking those questions I just said. They're asking, what's an agent? What are you talking about?
But it seems like it's coming and coming sooner, at least for the enterprise or for the teams that are committed to ChatGPT or GPT Enterprise or Claude for Teams or Claude for Enterprise. Those platforms got highly performant in the last few months.
I think that's the part that's been so exciting for me is if I was getting asked that 2-3 months ago, I could talk about an agent in theory. Now I could talk about agents that actually exist.
My chief of staff agent. It's an opening for me to talk about my AI chief of staff.
Exactly. I was just trying to set you up.
Okay, so we're going to share the list. We'll provide the answers that we use. Feel free, anyone, to borrow those, cut and paste them, make them your own, mix them up, modify them, and make them fit. I think the more relevant they are, accurate, authentic, context specific, they're going to work better. I think the big takeaway here is get those answers in everybody's hands, certainly at managers, so that they can lead this conversation and change. All right. Thanks for joining. I look forward to our next newsletter. And listen, let me stay in the seat as the podcast host, at least for a few months before you take it.
Maybe we'll publish it in the newsletter, the 10 questions.
Yeah, we should. It's a great newsletter.
All right.
Especially this new framing, I think is good.
Yeah,
like questions and then conversations, and have answers and then be able to have conversations, because they're two different things.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. I'll see you later.
I think my biggest takeaway from this conversation is, in some cases, you might have a very simple and direct answer, but really what's going on here is it's a chance for a conversation. This is not going to be a one-size-fits-all, either the list of questions or the answers, but we tried to organize them based on the types of users you have in your own organization, meaning the questions from resistors are different from experimenters, and they're different from the questions you get asked by power users. I think it's a good frame to organize your thinking around how you're going to answer these questions. We're at a moment that creates a lot of anxiety and uncertainty for our teams. For some, that is the energy use and the impact on the environment of data centers. For others, it's going to be the impact on their jobs. For others, it might be which are the safe AI tools that they can use. I think you've got to be able to have most of those answers, or at least have those conversations. This is what we need to lower anxiety and accelerate employees' adoption of these technologies. Thank you for listening to Supercompanies. Next episode, we're speaking with Bryce Chalamel, one of the world's experts on AI transformations, a change management partner from BCG. Then he worked at Google. Then he ran AI transformation at Moderna for 3 years. And for the last 5 months, he's been at OpenAI advising their largest enterprise clients on AI transformations. It'll be a value and wisdom-packed episode, so don't forget to join us. Between now and the next episode, you can find me online at supercompanies.ai, where you can sign up for my newsletter, also called Supercompanies. If you've got some challenges or questions about your own AI transformation, either personally or for your team, drop a comment or email us at podcast@sectionai.com. And if you've got a second, please leave us a rating, a review, or subscribe. Be a big help to us. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon.